To go back just a little bit, when did you notice that QDM and your founding of QDMA was starting to make a change? I'm not saying there's just the first signs when you were really starting to see change within South Carolina, and then when did you start to see the change outside of your state, and you were really starting to witness things start to steepen?
Well, I'll have to start off with a quote from Al Brothers, and he said in his book, 1975 version, Producing Quality Whitetails, what we need is a revolution. We needed a storm. We needed something to bring us together, to make some changes and to fight tradition, because tradition had taken us in a bad direction. And in our efforts to stay in better touch with our constituents here in this 7-county district, Lewis and I, we had a contest going to see if we could average giving a talk a week. And,
I like that.
And you think of how many people you can reach in a year's time. That's over 100 talks in 7 counties. And I said, Lewis, the one thing I don't want to ever happen, I don't want somebody to ask a deer hunter in any one of our 7 counties who his biologist is, and for him to say, I don't know. We don't want that to happen.
I like that.
And we were on a first name basis with thousands of these hunt club members. They realized that we were not against them. We were working for them, with them. And again, back to the malleable whitetail. You give the whitetail a chance. Get older, feed them well, they will make you happy. If what you're using to measure your success is antler development, it's there. And I think the thing that really clued us in that things were really working is that this newsletter, all of a sudden, we had people from not just beyond the boundaries of our 5 or 7 counties throughout the state, and then we had people from North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, so it was growing northward, westward, southward. And after a little over a year, we said, well, heck, we need to change our name from the South Carolina QDMA to just the QDMA. And I think then was when we realized that this thing is really up and running. And if you look at the magazine articles that were in Field and Stream, Sports Afield, and you name it, that all of a sudden everybody was writing about quality deer management. Still some with a lot of reservations, saying tread lightly, you're on thin ice, it may not work for everybody, and it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for most. And if your acreage is too small, get your neighbors with you, double, triple your acreage, it grows exponentially, and the rewards are measurable, they're obvious. So yeah, I think that was probably what happened. And the time frame was about the time this newsletter in 93 went over to the magazine. We were responding to the request of the hunters, and still we didn't have anybody but volunteers working for the organization. I mean, there were some really important names back in those early days. Andrew Harper was the first person to use his secretary, Ann Brizendine, to get the newsletters out and stay in touch with people, working completely out of his pocket to keep things going. And then Robert and Kathy Manning came along. And then we had an executive director for a short period, Alan Smith, down in Apopka, Florida. And then, of course, Donna, my wife, we got married in '94, and one of the wedding presents we got from Robert and Kathy was show up in the driveway here with all of the records. All right, the QDMA is now yours. And so Donna became the voice of the QDMA just out of this office right here. I mean, she worked there for 3 years. She was the only employee for the whole organization.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of volunteer work in those early days that made things really happen. Robert Manning was the chairman of our board of directors, and then for a brief while was called the executive director, but he wasn't paid. Anyway, Donna was here for 3 years, and then Brian Murphy was a young student that I had met at the University of Georgia. He helped start a QDMA branch in Athens.
Nice.
And I got to meet him then, and he and I had the same major professor, Dr. Larry Marshington. And I mentioned to you earlier that I had been to Australia a number of times to sort of blaze the trail of QDM for a different deer species, for the fallow deer in Tasmania, and was offered the job. And I said, look, I've got too many things going on here, but I've got a young fella that is the kind of person you need. He's much more computer literate, and you're going to need that.
Yeah.
He meets the public really well, and he works on a schedule of 7 Mondays a week. So he's not going to be taking a lot of holidays. He's going to hit the ground running. And I said, I'll give you one name. You don't need to waste your time interviewing a second person. He is the person you need. So Brian and his wife Heidi went to Tasmania, spent 4 years.
Oh wow, 4 years.
And we thought, well, we'll just tread water because he'll be a perfect executive director when he finishes. And I promised him, coming back to Howell Brothers and his promises, I said, hey, you can look around when you get back. If you want a job, I've got one for you. So in '97, he became our first official paid executive director. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I put everything that I had in several boxes and put them in my El Camino and drove them to Athens and gave them to him with an envelope with less than $200 in it. And I said, it's all yours.
So that kind of puts us at good times. 1997, that's a year I can kind of, understand what was going on. But at what point during this process, spearheading QDM in the South, QDMA, did you really start to see some major biological changes? And a minute ago you touched on, the State of the Union type of, reports QDMA was doing across the board of the country. But when were you as a hunter? That's some bio, but when were you as a hunter and a biologist just noticing that just some big time bucks? I mean, just the hunting quality. When did you really start to say, wow, this has really paid off?
Well, I told you that I had done that spotlight survey on Mr. DuPont's property, which is just right across the Combahee River from here. And I saw so many racked bucks that night. And then when I moved to a local plantation here in '85, it was only 3 or so years into the program, and we were harvesting about 12 to 15 really nice bucks a year. So I would either make European mounts or have the heads mounted, and it was a big wrangling situation after the season. But I got all those deer back together and took them all down to a barn and put them all on the front of a barn just down the road here. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years in a row. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. I mean, I would show that picture to people and they'd say, my gosh, how many years and how many properties did these deer come from? I said, 1 year, 1 property, 3,000 acres. You gotta be kidding. Did you bring deer in from elsewhere to get these big antlers? No, we didn't. We used native deer. So I personally spent 10 years on that property watching QDM at work. And then from a numbers point of view on our growth, about the time we took all the paperwork to Brian in 97 and Donna turned it over to him, maybe 2,500 members. And in short order, our membership went to 10,000. And I thought, we have arrived. We've really gotten there. And then we got recognized in 2011 by the Southeast Deer Study Group. And if you remember, you were there just last week, and I don't know who got the Career Achievement Award this year, but they've been given, not every year, most years, they give a Career Achievement Award. In all of those years, only one time an organization has gotten that. And the QDMA was recognized that way in 2011. So that was another milestone in our growth as an organization that proved to us that we had arrived. We've got the ball rolling. We've got the right people behind that movement, and we need to make sure we keep the right people behind that movement. I found out just the other day that next month the NDA will be receiving the 2023 Conservation Award from the Pope and Young Club.
Wow, very nice.
Here again, we have arrived. We are a household name, and we're here to stay. We're here to stay.
I've been thinking about this question, Joe, and I know you're a hunter and you're an avid turkey hunter. We talked a little bit about turkey hunting earlier. I will tell you, the past couple of weeks, it's my truck's been covered in pollen. So, birds are out. I mean, it's. I have some. I met some people last week at the conference, and they're in snow. You know, there's people from up north, and they got, you know, like Matt Ross had I think 6 inches coming when we were there. And you know, stop me if I'm off track, but are there any similarities between what the eastern wild turkey? It's not apples and apples. It's not even on the same planet. But are there any similarities between what the eastern wild turkey biologists are doing right now, because they've been, you know, trying to educate people, because the issues with the turkey, and I'm not going to go in the weeds about that, but it's nothing really new. The biologists have been tracking this, and they've been preaching it for a while, but it seems like over the past probably 5 years, with the help of social media, a lot more biologists are hosting their own podcast, and they're putting their own content out for the public.
Right.
And turkey hunters are starting to really understand this. But do you think there's any? Now, I know the approach is different, because the approach is so much different, because what you've been talking about is the mid-late 80s. We're talking about right now social media, where everyone in their pocket has access to the internet, podcast, Google Earth images. It's amazing what we have in our pocket. Are there any similarities with what these turkey biologists trying to understand? They're working with state agencies to change the season so the turkeys can breed before they're killed? Or do you see anything or similarities?
I'll quote a late friend of mine from Australia, who passed away at the age of 95, 6 or 7 years ago. And in one of our last conversations, he said, "Joseph, nothing lasts. Just keep that in mind."
That's right.
It might last a long time. It might be ephemeral. It might just last days or weeks or a month, but Nothing lasts. Keep that in mind. Look at the bobwhite quail. Who would have thought in the 30s and 40s that you'd ever have a problem finding a wild covey? I flushed a covey last month on a rabbit hunt in Georgia, and I yelled when out of just jubilant, look what I just saw. And then I started trying to remember when I last saw a wild covey. And it's been a month, I can't remember the last covey. Switch over to the wild turkey. I grew up in a county in eastern North Carolina. There was the odd sighting of a turkey here or there or yonder. And then we got into relocation of turkeys, especially in the 70s and 80s. I used to love doing that. As soon as deer season was over, I was in a turkey blind with a line of corn out with a rocket net set up behind it, catch turkeys, put them on a relocation area. We started moving them to other states, and we started learning a lot about turkey habitat. We always thought that was sort of the denizen of the deep forest. They proved to us that they were using young pine plantations and a lot more habitats than we ever thought they would. But what are they feeding on? Invertebrates, insects and things, and a lot of the legumes. One of their major enemies is shade, just like the bobwhite quail. But we learned a lot from turkeys in all this relocation. The numbers built to really high levels, and we've witnessed some declines lately. Well, what's causing that? Is it the way we hunt? Is it because of regulations? Can you simply change regulations and soften the problems a little bit? I don't know. That seems to be the direction that some people are thinking right now, but habitat related, that's got to be a major factor. And how has habitat changed in the last few years?
You probably noticed that change, when going through starting in the late 80s and the education of herd health. That was a question I thought about earlier, is that when did people start to connect the dots of, well, QDMA is talking about deer, but everything that they're educating us, it helps the songbirds, butterflies, quail, turkey.
Absolutely.
It all wraps in. It's not just, even though that's what because we're deer hunters at the core, but it's everything. It's the soil quality.
That's right.
And I'm sure at some point that those dots were starting to be connected, especially by state agencies, biologists, and people that had the education that maybe doubted the process early on.
That's a good segue into the book that I finally put together after working on it for 40 years. I didn't realize until lately that I was writing a book. But at a point I realized that I had written enough that if I could start corralling these stories and start naming some chapters and pulling the stories together, by gosh, I can write a book. I mean, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be an author of a book. But I'm sitting right here by the fire pot, and the name of the book is Firepot Stories. And it's got 10 chapters, it's got 70 some stories, and I've got butterflies in there, I've got songbirds and salamanders, turkeys, some fishing episodes, a lot of hunting, a lot of philosophy, a lot of humor, some sad stories, some of the bumps along the way that we encountered that we've talked about, poaching. We've left out poaching, and that's we don't even need to go there.
Don't get me started.
But we recognize that problem, and we've got a lot more eyes and ears out there now. There's a program that all state agencies participating in. It's sort of like Neighborhood Watch, but it's a wildlife operation. You can call in tips to catch poachers. Yeah, that's sideline. But anyway, when I got this book together, I personally don't like goodbyes. I don't like things coming to an end. And I go back to Arthur Bentley's statement, nothing lasts. Well, I don't like to deal with that. I don't like closure. And I had to end this book somehow or another. And I spent the morning on the porch of a cabin overlooking the Cape Fear River, and I had a yellow legal pad, and I was making all my notes, and I had turkey hunted that morning with 2 teams of father-son turkey hunters. No success tangibly, but on the team that I was with, we stopped our trip early that morning because I heard 2 different birds calling that were first cousins, and it was time for an ornithological lesson. So we had chuck-will's widows and whippoorwills, and I said, all right, the chuck-will's widow whistles more often than every second, so maybe 70 times a minute, 75 times a minute. The slower one, the whippoorwill, whistles about 50 times a minute. So you just start listening, and you can tell we got 2 different species here. So we did that and went on the turkey hunt. And on the way back, we found a bear track and a turkey track. And I had a little lesson there because I had done my master's work on black bears, and I had been a part of the stalking team that caught turkeys that went to my home county. So we had another lesson there. So I spent my day on the porch wrestling with the idea of closure. I've got to say the end. And I waited until fly-up time when I saw a few turkeys fly across the river, and I heard them gobble on the roost. And that was followed by the barred owls, the 8-hooters. So you had one species proclaiming a day's work was over, another saying a day's work or night's work is just beginning. It was sort of the changing of the guard. And then I started looking at how I value my times afield. And it's your ears as much as your eyes. So I drove the 2 miles out to the highway at a snail's pace with my windows down, and I was listening to the spring peepers and the southern chorus frogs and the pine woods tree frogs. All of these have very specialized niches, whether it's running water or a little ephemeral pool or what the locals call a wet weather pond. So I've got a map that's building in my head with all these sounds, and I know the changes in the habitat are being sent to me audibly by all these frogs. So when I got to the highway, Mark, I thought, this is it. This is what this whole thing is about. Instead of closing the doors, I'm opening a double wide door, and I'm saying, look, you'll never learn everything that's out there, but you need to learn something every time you go. You need to be able to identify birds and frogs and all, telling you what kind of habitats they prefer. The good news is there'll never be a final exam. And the doors are wide open.
That's right.
So here's the challenge. Learn as much as you can, and in that process, you become a better steward. And there's a degree of responsibility that goes with that stewardship. So whatever you're trying to manage, you manage it holistically. You're not managing just the whitetails, but like you said a minute ago, you're thinking about the turkeys and the quail and the songbirds and even the amphibians, whatever. It's all part of the package.
That's right.
And it's incumbent upon you now, more than ever before, to be an educated steward. And with that educational process, when you get to respect, you're home free. So That's my bottom line.
I love that.
That's my bottom line.
And that's a great way to wrap this up. And that's a great segue to